All right, guys, we're back. So Better Body Radio makes its return for 2021. We haven't released a show since our last guest appearance of Michael Goulden in 2020, and it was a great way to finish out the year, not just with our regular episodes, but with guest episodes. But now, today is our first regular episode of 2021. And what we're really actually diving into first today is it's a bit of a shameless plug from my side. I'm very proud to be announcing that I'm going to be releasing my first education product, so to speak, into the market. It's more particularly into the fitness market here in the UAE. I'm releasing what's known as the Muscle Mechanics Mentorship. Essentially, it's going to be an 8-week blended experience of learning, both online and in person. It's going to be targeted at professionals here for the UAE, but the goal is eventually to be at a point where, due to its online nature for the first 6 weeks, I'll be in a position where if the demand is there to travel to different countries, different locations, and deliver this information, if other people find this useful, certainly I have ties back to the UK, to Scotland, to Glasgow. And, if there's people that I've networked with from other parts of the world, Canada, Australia, etc., then of course, 100% I'll be happy to take this product, especially as it grows and it builds and it actually develops into something much bigger than what it is at the start, which eventually will exceed a kind of 8-week mentorship plan. But where we're starting out is that I want to very much target the UAE audience, fitness audience, trainers, coaches, and fitness enthusiasts to a degree as well, because, you don't need to be a qualified personal trainer to want to understand biomechanics, exercise mechanics specifically, which is really a sub-branch of biomechanics. And if you understand exercise mechanics to at least enough of a foundational level, you will exponentially improve the outcomes of your training, not only from an actual results perspective and actually being able to create an effective stimulus from your training, but having a greater appreciation and understanding for what's going on inside our bodies in terms of the joints, the joint forces that we're trying to manage, whilst of course trying to train our physiques, or even if we're a strength athlete or an athlete and we're generating forces through the joints, through the musculature, we kind of have to appreciate exactly what the potential risks to benefits are of that and what we can do to limit and minimize unwanted adaptations such as injuries, calcification of bones and joints, wearing down of connective tissue, and all of these things. So let's dive into what the Muscle Mechanics Mentorship actually is. So it's targeted initially here at trainers in Dubai. The idea will be to go around the UAE, Abu Dhabi, potentially the other Emirates, or for other coaches to travel into Dubai, as it tends to be a bit of a central hub. And the goal is really going to be to deliver over a 6-week period a set of online lectures. And we'll get into, for the guys that especially that are watching this via YouTube, we're going to dive into and you'll be able to see this a little bit visually, a little bit of a sneak peek of what's in store as far as the online lessons are concerned. But we'll kind of just get into what, I guess for lack of a better term, what the kind of general structure of it is. So the 6 weeks of online learning, we go through a bit of an introduction of what muscle mechanics is, what's the intention of the course, like why did I create it, where did I feel the need came. From there, we then go into some of the foundational terminology and physiology that we'll be using throughout muscle mechanics. And so we do dive in a little bit into things like the central nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. Why do we have to be aware of the nervous system when it comes to exercise choice, exercise selection, and of course, how does that affect our mechanics and some of the things that we might observe not only with our own training and our own bodies, but what we're going to see in the multitude of the different clients that we end up working with. How does the nervous system have an impact on how well we are able to perform exercises, and so on and so forth? And what is it about the nervous system that can change how we might see an exercise perform one day from a client, and then the next day it might look quite a bit either not very different or very, very different. So we dive into all that. We definitely dive into all the muscle physiology as well. So we go right all the way down to the sarcomere. We talk about a little bit of just basic muscular biology, just so that we have a baseline understanding. And listen, the reality is there's a lot of aspects that will be discussed during the theory part of the course that you're not going to regurgitate this to your clients. It's not something you're going to say verbatim on a day-to-day basis. But the reality is that the information is important to know on a foundational level, because like Tom Purvis from RTS would always say, think science, speak client. And when we understand the nuts and bolts of how things work, we actually have a much greater ability to explain things in very simple terms. So that's really the goal of the kind of foundational theory part, is just to get enough muscular physiology, enough discussion around things like mechanisms of hypertrophy, training approaches, pros and cons, and all these sort of things. And then from there, really, we move on to what's kind of known, I guess, as some of the kind of textbook versus functional anatomy. So what is it that we're told at, personal training school, for example? What is it about, for example, looking at a textbook and thinking, well, this muscle does all of these things. And then people end up in a position where I've heard Cass Hansen talk about this. I know my mentor, Michael Golden, uses this term a lot as well. People end up in a bit of a situation of mental masturbation where they end up just trying to do all of these different things to make sure that they feel the greatest sensation for a muscle. But then the reality is that just because a muscle has a list of functions and can do all of these things, we even give a couple of examples there, like the pec as an internal rotator. Should we be adding internal rotation to the end of our pressing movements? Or is that just creating an increased sensation, but not actually providing an additional stimulus? We look even at things like the hamstrings. Are we looking at like really locking the hips down into position and then trying to curl because it gets an increased sensation? Or is that actually an example of active insufficiency, which we dive into those sort of concepts in the course, like active and passive insufficiency, length tension relationships, and so on and so forth. And then we even have things like, like say, for example, the popularity, when popularity trumps logic. And so what I mean by that essentially is that we know that in the industry, booty bands have become incredibly popular. Brett Contreras, he's done a lot of incredible pioneering in many different ways. He's popularized the hip thrust or the glute bridge, whatever you want to name it. Ultimately, it's a supine bridge that gets the glutes into a shortened position. Incredible exercise, definitely a very valuable exercise. But he also popularized, unfortunately, the use of mini bands. The problem with mini bands is that for all of the glute fibers that we're generally trying to work on these hip extensor based movements, you're trying to essentially do a movement, you're trying to abduct the hips and extend the hips at the same time. And again, we get into a situation where while we're trying to do while we're trying to do both, we're not doing either optimally. So either really, if we're trying to really bias those hip abductors, hip external rotators, what we're trying to do, ideally we should work those. Whereas if we're trying to work the hip extensors, especially when we're trying to apply a lot of load through there, like we are with a barbell hip thruster, does it not then make sense just to actually get really good at using the hips in their extensor role rather than trying to add abduction and extension at the same time? And we actually even dive into how that actually limits your ability to get the glutes fully short as well. So it's just little things like that or stuff that we kind of dive into throughout the kind of entirety of the course. There's a whole other bunch of stuff there as well. What about active versus passive range? What types of different blocks will we get to that? What about neurological tightness? What about structural limitations? All of these things, stuff like the importance of proper setup. We dive into all of that sort of stuff as well. And I think really the key takeaway is that we need to understand nuance so that we can explain things in really simple terms. But not only that, one of the things that I'll have said, and by the time you see this podcast, you may also have seen the post that I made on Instagram, which I can essentially promote the course. And I say that ultimately our goal as coaches is not just simply to get results and to train our clients on it. We're there to solve problems as well. So that's incredibly key to our role as a coach, is that ability to solve problems for our clients. And the deeper the understanding we have of joint function, anatomy, exercise mechanics, we're in a much, much better place to solve those particular problems for each individual. Speaking of individualized, one of the other aspects we start diving into is many of the initial RTS concepts that Tom Purvis created way back in the early 2000s. And it amazes me that it's still not something that's actually spoken about all that much, is the focus on things like moment arms, understanding that actually when it comes to creating muscular tension, really what we're kind of interested in is total torque that's created from joint to joint. And so it's that ability to utilize both load, external load or internal focus, combined with a moment arm in order to create a desired outcome. And so we start really picking apart and diving into what moment arms mean, what is an exercise profile, i.e. what's a resistance profile, what's the strength profile of the muscle that we're trying to bias or work, or what's the strength profiles of the multiple muscles involved. All of these things are stuff that we start to dive into. And for me, we can't really start talking about forces or understanding how forces are applied to the body, whether it be the joints, the musculature, the connective tissue, etc. We cannot understand that unless we have a foundational understanding of force, and unless we have a foundational understanding of things like moment arms, torque, strength profiles, resistance profiles, length tension relationship, all of these different things, magnitude profiles, etc. And then we even dive a little bit deeper and going into things like net and resultant forces, component forces. We start talking about the importance of understanding rotational forces and things like that as well. So that's just a little bit of an insight, hopefully, into some of the things that we're going to be looking at during that particular part of the presentation. And then where it really moves on to a really interesting component really is the point where we get to where we start looking at the actual application of this stuff in the trenches in the gym, which is ultimately what we are all interested in, right? And I will get up and share this video in a second, just so I can give the guys who are watching this on YouTube a little bit of a sneak peek of what's going on. So essentially the way we set up the final module before we actually get into the 2 practical weekends at that last 2 weeks. So like I mentioned at the start, we have 6 weeks of online learning, and then we have 2 weeks at the end, 2 weekends, 2 days on both weekends. So 4 days total where we're going to dive into the practical. So we're going to take all of this stuff we learned in that first 6 weeks, and we're now going to take that and apply that in the trenches as a group together. By that point, we'll all be very familiar with each other. We'll have seen each other on the group calls, because that's also a thing we're doing. We'll have a weekly group Zoom call where you guys will have, for those that join the course, I'm making a very big presumption. I'm saying you guys, like everyone that listens to this, is going to come and do the course. But for those that do come and do the mentorship, the goal is going to be that I'm going to send you away with homework to do. There's going to be a certain number of modules, videos that you have to watch between each weekly Zoom call. And then we get on the Zoom call and we essentially just have a bit of a discussion initially for the first half hour around what were some of the key things we learned, were there any questions, things that you maybe didn't understand, and we kind of dive into that. And then the second half of the call, we then start, I usually will have prepared something in advance that maybe we haven't quite touched on in a particular way or in a certain context or to that level of depth. And we'll essentially just dive a little bit deeper and start adding even more nuance and context to what it is we're trying to learn. So I'm really excited for that. And so say, for example, the way it's set up is you've got what would be in theory, and then we've called it on the floor. So there's, like, say, for example, 10 muscle groups that we've kind of mainly divided into. We're looking at quads, hamstrings, chest, lats, mid-back. We're looking at, delts, triceps, biceps, calves, and then of course obliques, abs, etc. So that's split into kind of 10 different modules, and part 1 of each of those modules is going through the theory. So we go through the anatomy of those muscles, origins, insertions, their kind of functional role as musculature, like what do they actually do. So for example, understanding that the lats extend the humerus, but they also adduct the humerus as well. We get the idea of what's the role of the rec fem, in terms of knee extension and all that sort of stuff. And we start touching on a few of the kind of structural considerations that we might want to pay attention to for specific muscle groups. Certain muscles are bipennate, some of them are unipennate, so they only cross one joint, others cross 2 joints. Some cross 2 joints, but they've got multiple heads that cross multiple joints. Some muscles, like for example, the hamstrings, they cross 2 joints, whereas sometimes there's one of those 4 hamstring muscles that only cross 1 joint. And so there's a lot of little different considerations from muscle to muscle and the joints that surround those and that they potentially cross that we have to take into consideration, and they actually have quite a significant impact on our considerations around that exercise, how we might load it, some of the things we might be considering from let's just take, for example, the leg extension. Many don't really understand that, our legs actually can extend past that kind of, if we were to take our ankle in line with our knee and our hip, we would assume that that's kind of, and I'm doing this on the camera now, like a straight line with my hand, that would be kind of like 0 degrees. But what many don't realize is actually that our knees, because the patella acts as an anatomical pulley around there, it actually helps creates a little bit of a mechanical advantage. And so we're actually able to get, when we're fresh, and of course, when you reach fatigue, this might start to drop or differ, we can actually go about 5 degrees past that kind of 0 line and actually get the kind of lower limb up past what we'd consider to be parallel to the quads. And so that's quite important to know, because if we don't know that we have that mechanical advantage, we don't understand what would sort of end position we might be looking for. And of course, this is going to be client dependent and goal dependent. Then we might be missing out on getting that quad into a fully short range and actually then achieving the kind of effectiveness of that contractile stimulus of working into that short range, which ultimately a leg extension is the only exercise we can really effectively do that. which is why I hate when I see all these posts that squats are better than leg extension. It's just like, guys, we're not even looking at the same end of the muscle. Squats, length and range, leg extension, short and range. So I really do hate to see all these sound bites out there. So yeah, it's just, these are the type of things that we start to look at. Structural considerations, what type of muscles are they? Say we take the lats and the pecs. The lats and pecs are interesting because they're a fan-shaped muscles, so they have one insertion and multiple origin points. And so with knowing that, that's then going to influence, well, okay, how are we then going to bias? Can we bias particular fibers of the actual pecs? Let's say, for example, we know that the pecs often tend to get split up into kind of lower, mid, and upper. More specifically, we tend to know them as the costal, sternal, and clavicular, and we know that we can actually bias those, but then it's understanding that we can't completely shut off the other ones, and then we can start to explore understanding the anatomy, the origin and insertions, the fiber directions. We start to understand a little bit more about resultant forces. We start to then appreciate that it's never about switching the other two off to only work the other one. It's about biasing a particular line of fibers while the others contribute in the manner that they're designed to. So it's little things like that we really dive into, and it makes when we go into the gym and we start applying the stuff in practice, it just, you see, and I've seen this so much with clients and many of the other coaches that I coach personally, a lot of light bulbs going off, and it's so magical because you can just see that they've just completely opened up a whole new world of thought and exploration. And not only that, but they've just opened up a whole new level of effectiveness that they're going to get from their training, which for me is what I'm so excited about, is to launch this, go through the theory with the group and then get into that 2 weeks, 2 weekends of practicals, getting hands-on with everyone, myself and the rest of the Better Body team as well. It'll be myself, Mal, Charlie, Max, all on hand to really make sure that we have a really immersive experience. People get plenty of hands-on time with myself and with the other Better Body coaches, which we're really excited about. And then essentially the second part, like I said, is going to be of this module. So we have module 4, which is that, like I said, going through the actual structural anatomy, functional anatomy, and then some practical examples and some other considerations we might look at. Part 2 is then what we call on the floor. And this is what we've spent a lot of hours as a team filming, to really add a lot of visual context in the gym context with real people, real bodies, ourselves going through this, showing you what we mean by these concepts. So, I really like to thank Max, Mal, Charlie for all the time that they've given to help me with this, and also to the guys at Project Generation Strong, and Reza, our cameraman, for coming in and actually, taking the time. Like, we literally done 6 hours a week for multiple weeks, 3 hours on one day, 3 hours on another day, and we've just like shot just to really try and get through these particular, video modules. And so all this video content that we've created ultimately forms part 2 of each of the muscle group modules that we're going to go through. And so we start to take the actual, popular exercises and specific exercises that we might use most commonly in the gym with our clients to achieve a hypertrophy response. And we start breaking down some of the things that we spoke about from a principle standpoint, from a theory standpoint, and where does this apply when we're hands-on with clients? And by that stage, what my hope is going through in that format of, kind of theory and anatomy, then applied in practice, and then repeating that for every single muscle. By the time we get to the practicals at the end of the course, everyone should hopefully come into the practicals really wanting to explore, and would be super excited to kind of deep dive and see it in live, breathing other humans. Like, there'll be the team, you'll see us doing the stuff, you'll get to feel and experience the actual these different concepts and theories for yourself, and you'll be able to, as a coach, help other coaches kind of find that for themselves as well. So, and then the last part, like I mentioned, of the whole mentorship really is that final 2 weekends, and that's where we get hands-on. So yeah, very excited. So it's 5 modules. The first 4 modules will be delivered over the first 6 weeks, and then the 5th module will be the 2 practical weekends. I think the biggest message I would want people probably to take away from this would be, we cannot ever truly teach something if we haven't tried to develop mastery of it for ourselves first. And secondly, in order for us to then deliver that on with authenticity, we need to have lived it, learned it, and experienced it before we then teach it. And that's something that, myself and the other Better Body coaches, we've been doing this for over a decade, but all of us well over a decade each. And even now, we still feel like we've got so much to learn. We've got so much to uncover, so much to kind of dive into and learn and apply, and our knowledge is only continuing to grow. And the goal of the mentorship will be to very much act as a foundational bridge to getting a baseline understanding of exercise mechanics, the world of exercise mechanics, and being able to take that and apply that in a meaningful context with your clients to, of course, get better results, to get better training outcomes. And then ultimately, if you get better results for your clients, you get more referrals, and that's only better for your business, because then you're able to grow a bigger business. You're able to maybe scale your in-person business, which is what this course is directed at. Online coaches who are based in the UAE are definitely welcome, because this will help them with troubleshooting, maybe form checks with their online clients. But ultimately, if you're an in-person trainer, the ability to deliver extremely effective in-person training methods is paramount to your ability to grow in your business, retaining your clients, and getting results that you just simply cannot get with online. Because when we're hands-on and we can make that massive difference every single rep that a client does during our 1 hour together, or whatever time you do with your clients, that is invaluable. And that's why I believe that personal training will never die. Online coaching is super valuable. I personally do it myself, and moving more towards that realm so I can spend more time working on the education arm of our business. But we can never, ever undervalue the experience and the value that a good quality in-person trainer and coach can offer. It's literally irreplaceable. And hence why we're doing it in a blended fashion with the online learning and the in-person delivery. So, and then the last point I would just make to this would just be, it's an industry where people feel like they're being judged constantly. We're being judged on how we look. We're being judged on what we know. We're being judged on the results that we essentially can put out there on a consistent basis. And ultimately, what we wanted to create with the Muscle Mechanics Mentorship was a judgment-free environment where you feel like you can come, you can explore your current level of knowledge, you can explore the new knowledge you've acquired, and you can ask questions without ever worrying about that you're going to be judged, that you're going to be looked at as not knowing things and not understanding things, because the whole goal of the situation is actually to put yourself around other people who are going to challenge your current biases, who are also in a kind of similar position to you. They're just trying to level up and get their knowledge up to the next level. And so we need to be willing to put ourselves in an uncomfortable environment in order to achieve growth. It's ultimately what we're asking our clients to do every single week when we train them at the gym, and when we ask them to make modifications to their lifestyle, their nutrition. They're working on their own mindset and themselves, and the relationships they have with other people as well. If we are asking our clients to get into uncomfortable situations, then it only seems just that we do that for ourselves when it comes to our own personal and professional development. So guys, I'm going to leave it there, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight. I am going to keep going for the guys on YouTube, but for the rest of the podcast that's going to be actually published on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your preferred podcast platforms, that will be the end of it there. Now, people will be asking, where can I get more information? How can I apply to secure my space if you're a trainer who's based here in the UAE? Well, very simply, if you go to the link tree in either the Better Body Collective bio, or you go to the link tree in my bio, you just tap the link, and then you'll see a button right at the top in black that's going to say Muscle Mechanics Mentorship interest, like registering your interest for that course. You'll see a big black button at the top. You tap that. We've then created a very short initial application form that's 6 questions long. It's your name, your email, and a few questions about whether the course dates work and what's the thing that you're trying to get from the course. What's the thing you would like to get out of attending the Muscle Mechanics Mentorship? You complete that, and then what will happen is that within the next couple of weeks, as I'm putting together the final parts of the course, I will reach out to you directly, and I will touch base with you on things like the investment amount and whether it's a good fit for you to come on the course at this point in time. We are only taking on a limited number of people. It's only going to be 15 coaches at the start, but then we will be immediately taking a waiting list for the next couple of intakes as well. I'll leave it there, guys. Have a fantastic week. Remember, when it comes to the podcast, please do go and support us as best you can. If you listen to this podcast and you're able to take a screenshot and share that on your Instagram stories and tag us at Better Body Collective, we'd really appreciate that. Other thing you can do is, if you listen to this on Apple Podcast, you can leave us a 5-star review and a comment. That means the world to us, and it helps us get this podcast in front of many, many more people. Thanks so much, guys, and I will see you in the next episode. For those of you that are stuck around who are on YouTube, we're going to just have a little quick sneak peek at the modules here, or some of the modules. So if we look at this here, as you can see, actually I need to share my screen. Sorry, hold on. There we go. That is the tab right there. Cool. So you guys should see right in front of me now. We're on Canva here where the slides were created for the course. So as you'll see here, we've got the governor, the central nervous system, and this just gives you an idea of some of the things we're going to start diving into. The way that this is going to be presented is, funny enough, it's actually going to be done via Loom video. And so you're going to see my little head sitting in the corner, kind of very similar to the way that the Zoom video is up here right now. And yeah, you're going to essentially see, I'm going to be sitting in the corner, just staying incognito out of the way. And you're going to have the ability to come in here and essentially watch each video at your own pace. And I'll be presenting these in just short bite-sized pieces. So you can literally just watch one module at a time, go away, have a think, let it synthesize, and then come back. So you'll see that we really dive into the autonomic nervous system, the central nervous system, and why that's so important to what it is we do. So we talk about there's essentially two sides of the autonomic nervous system. We look at that sympathetic and parasympathetic branches, and so on and so forth. So that's a little bit of an intro to that. And then we have here, we start diving into some of the real foundations. So this is an excerpt from module three, which is the Muscle Mechanics Foundation principles and concepts, adopted from the RTS curriculum, of course. So I always have to give credit where credit's due. And we start diving into some of the things like, Force 101. So what are forces? What are the main three force influences? We look at things like point of application, direction of force, forces of magnitude, all that sort of stuff. And then we start getting into, right, well, let's have a look at net forces, resultant forces, component forces. And bear in mind that before all of this, we'll have went through all of the key aspects around what moment arms are and all of that sort of stuff as well. So as you can see, very visual as we get towards the later parts of the presentation. The further we get actually into the online course, the more visual it starts to become, because we have to start taking these theoretical concepts and start being able to visualize and see them in kind of visual terms. And then, of course, where this becomes a bit more difficult is seeing this as it pertains to humans when we have them in front of us, and what we can see going on at machines as well when we're looking at the profile of different machine mechanics as well. So you'll see here, and we always provide as many practical examples as are relevant here. Wonderful. And that's just an example of some of the stuff from module 3. Module 4, this, I'm just going to give you a little quick of a preview of the pectorals. And so for the pectorals here, you'll see it's like I said, module 1, part 1 is always going to be, let's look at the theory, the actual pec anatomy. So we start looking at the different heads, clavicular head, sternal head, costal head, pec minor, which is important as well. Start diving into what are the origins and insertions of each of these muscle groups. Important to know. And the thing is that, listen, even myself as an educator, I cannot remember all of the origins and insertions off heart. I'm much, much better with some parts of the body. Other parts of the body, I trip my tongue a lot and I forget. So it's a constant work in progress. And, my mentor can literally rattle off ridiculous. It's almost as if he has anatomy and physiology encyclopedia inside his head. He just can rattle it off without even flinching, which is really, really cool. So I guess the point I'm making is that I can pass this on because I've spent a lot of time looking at this, understanding how it applies in practice, which is ultimately where it matters. However, the more you expose yourself to anatomy and physiology, to these materials, to other materials where you start to learn a bit more in depth about the joints, the muscles themselves, this stuff will start to become much more autonomic. You'll be able to recite a lot of this stuff much, much more confidently. And I'm just, all I'd probably be is I don't know everything when it comes to anatomy and physiology, but I'm just a bit further along the path. And that's the way to look at it. I'm here with you guys, just taking what I've learned over the last 11 years, what I'm still learning now. And my goal is that as I progress and as I add to my knowledge base, I want to try and bring you guys up with me. And then even when you get to the point where I am now, by that point, I'll have acquired new knowledge, a new level of understanding. And then the goal is for those that stick around long enough, I will then help you bring up to that point. And so the way I see this is it's not a competition. It's not I know more than you or anything like that. It's much more about let's help each other to level up and to raise the standard that we conduct ourselves at and to raise the standard of the industry in general. So that's really what we're looking to do here. And as you'll see, we start diving into some of the structural considerations. What does that look like in practice in terms of lines of fibers? And then what are some exercises of training the chest? As you'll see, and then we actually get into the on the floor, which is the kind of recorded part of the actual course, where we have that. We kind of take these concepts that we just talked about, and then we see it visually with myself and one of the team kind of going through certain exercises that we would commonly prescribe to our clients. But I'm going to stop the share there. So hopefully for those guys that stuck around and are watching the YouTube video, that was kind of useful and gave you a little bit of a sneak peek at what we're kind of going to be diving into during the Muscle Mechanics Mentorship. I'm going to wrap it up there. I've already done the exit on the main podcast. So until next time, guys, I will see you then.